worry is our best attempt to solve for something that we can't actually solve for. Welcome back to the channel. This is The Other Therapy with Trevor Brown. Today we're going to be talking about worry, so let's dive right into it. Have you ever heard that quote by Mark Twain? I have spent a very long and troubled life, most of which never happened. So what he's pointing to here are all the countless hours that he spent lost in his own worries, in his own fantasies about things that could go awry, that never did go awry. And many of us know that even while we're worrying, on some level we're aware that so much of this content that we're distressed about isn't going to happen. And yet, even with that awareness, we don't seem to be able to stop worrying. How is that the case? Today, I'm going to be making a lot of references to a paper titled The Cognitive Avoidance Theory of Worry. I think it does a great job at explaining what worry is and why we worry. Now, they say that worry is an understandable mental response to a perceived threat to which no behavioral solution exists. Let's unpack that in its three core pieces. It's a mental phenomenon. It's happening here. It's happening in the mind. We all know that. Worry happens here. It happens in the form of thoughts. The technical term is verbal linguistic thinking. It is these thoughts that are occurring as the result of a perceived threat, meaning that we have perceived a threat, that something has happened, we've had a particular thought or maybe a particular feeling, and we've labeled it unconsciously as a threat, as a bad thing, as something that needs to be accounted for. Now, the third part of that is that there is no behavioral solution available. And of course there isn't, because the perceived threat, the thing that we're relating to as a threat, is just something that's in our mind or in our body. It's a thought or it's a feeling. There's nothing that we can actually do in real time on a behavioral level in order to mitigate the threat. If we were out in the wilderness and an animal was chasing us, it would be very clear that there was an obvious concrete threat that requires a behavioral reaction in order to reduce the likelihood of harm. We would run away from the animal, theoretically. But worry is different, because worry is responding to things that are happening in here. And there's not much that we can do in here. It's just kind of a realm of fantasies. And we can't enact a behavioral solution that accounts for fantasy worries. So the positive aspect of worry is that it's our best attempt to solve something, to solve what we perceive to be a threat. But the downside is that that threat is only occurring inside the mind, not in the real world, so we can't actually solve for it. So worry is our best attempt to solve for something that we can't actually solve for. And I think that's why worry just kind of builds on itself and just perpetuates and perpetuates, because it can't actually get to a point of resolution. But I want to speak to two other elements of worry, to two other functions that worry is serving in any given moment. The first of these is what is called emotional avoidance. Worry is a way that we distance ourselves from sensation level emotions that we intuitively know we would rather not feel. And so we escape them, we distance ourselves from them or protect ourselves from them by distracting ourselves with worry. In this sense, worry is serving the function of removing us from our raw, sensation-leveled, embodied vulnerability. As the authors of the paper that I mentioned earlier say, by shifting to worrisome thinking, humans can reduce the somatic activation of anxious experiencing. This is because verbal linguistic thought elicits very little physiological response. What this means is that when we go into the world of thinking, we're able to get out of the raw emotion inside of our bodies. We create a little bit of a buffer zone between what's happening here by focusing on what's happening here. And of course, the more compelling the drama, the more magnetizing or interesting the worries, the better they serve as a distracting function from this vulnerability that we would rather not feel. But there's a downside to it. And the downside is that every time we move into the world of thoughts or the realm of thinking as a means of avoiding emotional vulnerability, we are further convincing ourselves that this emotional vulnerability needs to be avoided. So it appears as a threat, we relate to it as a threat, and each time we successfully get away with it, we actually reinforce our pre-existing conviction that it is indeed a threat and is something that needs to be gotten away from. Now, the other aspect of worry is that studies have shown that worriers actually believe on some level that the fact that they worry has prevented the worried about things from occurring. That was a mouthful. More succinctly, worriers actually think that their worries stop the things that they worry about from happening. So in this sense, worriers actually convince themselves that their worry is not only valid, but actually necessary. But of course, when we step back and look at this logically, it's quite obvious that worry doesn't actually stop the worried about things from happening. That's what Freud would call magical thinking. When we think that our thoughts have some sort of direct correlation with what happens in reality, that there's a causal relationship between our thoughts and what happens out here. And so the other thing that we were speaking about is that worry is a real-time solution that we employ to distance ourselves from feelings we don't want to have or we don't want to be aware of. If that's the primary function of worry, then there's actually a lot that we can do with that. As the authors write, and I quote, "If avoidance of emotion is a frequent contributor to worry, then repeated exposure to emotions may be a wise therapeutic strategy." So what they're saying is that if one of the main reasons we worry is that we're trying to avoid emotions that we don't want to feel, then if we turn towards the emotions that we don't want to feel, we may find out that there's nothing that's actually threatening about them. We just think that they're threatening. But when we go into them, and when we learn that we can tolerate them, that they're not going to kill us, that we can handle it actually without too much to do, then this particular function of worry is reduced. So then we rely on worry less in the future to protect ourselves from emotions because we recognize that we don't need to be protected from emotions. I have a couple of potentially helpful tools or reminders that you might use in a moment where you notice that you're captured by very compelling stories of worry. One of these is to ask yourself, I wonder what I'm feeling right now on a somatic level just beneath the worry. Another way of saying it is, what am I feeling underneath my worry right now that I wish I didn't have to feel? Or if I were to drop my worry right now, what would I be forced to face? These are all ways of inviting us to put our awareness at the level of our emotional world instead of at the level of our thinking mind. They're ways that we can cut through the cognitive process of worry and return to the thing that we might be using worry to try to get away from. And when we do that and we find that we can handle it, then we don't need to take refuge in worry in that moment. If I really recognize that worry in any given moment is just me trying to take care of myself by helping me avoid what I think is threatening, aka my feelings, then in small ways, I can experiment with going into my feelings to see if they're actually threatening. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just intense. Maybe they're just uncomfortable. But maybe they're completely workable. It could be our very avoidance of our emotional world, of our vulnerabilities, that gives them the appearance of being something real and big and solid and terrifying. But when we turn to them, when we drop our worry temporarily and turn directly towards our emotions, we may find that we do not need to avoid them. And with that comes a whole world of confidence and workability, and ultimately, for the purposes of this video, less need to rely on worry in order to avoid what we don't want to feel. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you found that video useful. Hopefully there are a couple of tools or ways of thinking about worry that you didn't have before. I encourage you to try them on, and please leave your thoughts or comments in the comment section. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you joining. This is the third of the other therapy videos. And if you like this, please go ahead and subscribe. You could even hit the like button. I look forward to seeing you for the next video. Have a great day. Cheers.